Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Welcome back. We had an intermission.
We did.
We had a pause. We did something different, which was Tolkien reading Eino Lindale in his, in not his own voice, but in a voice that sounded very much like him. I don't even know if legally I can say his own voice. Yeah.
In a voice generated from recordings of his voice.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We didn't get it. So I was gone. I had planned a long time ago. I had planned a 3-week trip with my family. I wanted to teach my kids to ski. There's a really nice, inexpensive ski resort in southern Utah called Bryan Head. We drove there from Tennessee. It was a long drive, but we were there for 3 weeks. I taught my kids. 3 of my kids got to ski free there. So anyway, long story short, we were AWOL. We hadn't even talked in a month really. So we were like, I was just gone. And I wouldn't recommend, though, I think we talked about this, I would not recommend a 2-day drive to Utah from Tennessee. That is 2 16-hour days that are mind-numbingly boring.
Did you at least listen to audiobooks or something on your headphones?
Audiobooks, podcasts. I started listening to one called The Wide, Wide Sea, which was about, what's his name? James Cook. Who nice. Explored all over the author. I can't remember his name, but I've enjoyed a few of his other books. Anyway, so that was one I was listening to. Yeah, a bunch of podcasts, Lord of the Rings stuff, some Tolkien stuff. So yeah, but don't do it. Don't do it. But if you do it, spend 3 weeks away so that makes it feel worthwhile. Okay. In any case, we are back on The Hobbit, though. That said, we in our extended podcast, we are going to talk about recreating Tolkien's voice. How he did it, some of you probably already know. It's not like it's super hard now. It just takes a little bit of time and massaging and figuring it out. So we'll talk about that. We'll look at that. I'll get your reaction and you get my reaction because we didn't really talk about it at all. And then we can talk about the ethics of that. Like, is it okay to recreate his voice? I mean, or to take people's voices and recreate them? Who owns? Anyway, it's kind of a weird place to be. But we'll talk about that extended podcast, which you can get by becoming a supporter at $4 a month. It's free for the first month, though. So if you just want to listen to that, just join up and become a member at theonering.com/member, or go to Patreon. Theonering.com/Patreon will bring you right there, and you can sign up for $5 a month with the first week being free. But yeah, thanks to our supporters, especially as we are doing it twice a month now for a while yet. And then we will eventually probably jump back into a more frequent pattern for the podcast, but for now it's still twice a month. And so thank you to all of our members who keep us going. And one day, Michael, will do a podcast while smoking a cigar, because those are the fruits of our labor, sort of kind of here from doing the podcast.
That would be fun. Yeah, we'll have to do the right setup for that. We do our live. I do smoke a cigar at our live streams, but
yeah, me too. Yeah, and now that it's I don't smoke inside, obviously. So, but now that it's warm again, I can go outside and we could actually do a recording. I just set it up. It's not that hard. Should be relatively easy.
No, it's actually nice.
So anyway, so there you go. Those are the ins and outs, dotting our I's and crossing our T's before we get into The Hobbit. Before we get into The Hobbit. Oh, by the way, let's see. Oh no, this is coming out Tuesday. On Monday, the 31st of March, we are having another live chat with everybody. We'll be doing that at 9 p.m. Eastern. So join us so that next month in April, which will probably be like probably 4 weeks. So like the 28th of April or so, we'll probably be doing it again, where we just get together and we chat and we talk about everything that's been going on and questions and thoughts. And Jennifer Salke leaving Amazon, the director of Amazon who brought the Rings of Power to Amazon, has been booted, has been yeeted out of Amazon, and so that'll be an interesting thing.
Yep, things they are changing in the entertainment world.
Yeah,
slowly sometimes, but then all at once.
Yeah, I'm hoping more changes are coming.
Yep,
we'll see. We still have the Hunt for Gollum coming at some point in the future.
I have a hard time seeing how that's going to be. It reminds, in a way, it's like the Gollum game where you're just retreading stuff that happened in between the story, the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
and how appealing can that be?
I don't.
I just don't
The
see
story, the beginning and the end of that story have been told. You're taking like the gristly middle that nobody wants and just making it into a film.
Exactly. Not
Yeah.
only did they not want it, but we were told most of the important things that happened in that gristly middle, as you say, at the Council of Elrond. So,
Yeah, right. But
I mean,
money grab.
it's you know, as the lame meme might go, cash grab is obvious. Or obvious cash grab is obvious. So
yeah, right. It is. But our attempt at getting through The Hobbit is not an obvious cash grab unless we get like thousands of subscribers. So let's get into.
Yes, help it make a tempting choice for us, folks.
That's right.
Help us show our worth.
So let's jump into that. We're into the second half of chapter 8 of The Hobbit of Flies and Spiders. But first, we do have to do our
Hobbit facts.
Okay. So a lot of people got into the Lord of the Rings from Peter Jackson's films. Not a lot of people got into The Hobbit from Peter Jackson's Hobbit films. I think that.
I wonder why.
So, one of the reasons that film was kind of weird was that Peter Jackson was not the original director on it, which a lot of people know, but some people don't. So here's your little tidbit. Guillermo del Toro was actually the director on the film. I don't know, what's his most famous film? He won for The Shape of Water. I never saw that.
Shape of Water, Pan's Labyrinth.
Pan's Labyrinth is probably a big one there. Anyway, he has a very unique vision. And so I thought I'd pull a couple interesting quotes from both Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro about this. So this little Hobbit fact about like why this movie felt so rushed and oddly disjointed in a very real way, to me at least. So this is what Peter Jackson said on directing The Hobbit. He said, because Guillermo del Toro had to leave and I jumped in and took over, we didn't wind the clock back a year and a half and give me a year and a half of prep time to design the movie, which was different to what he was doing. It was impossible. And as a result of it being impossible, I just started shooting the movie with most of it not prepped at all. You're going onto a set and you're winging it. You've got these massively complicated scenes, no storyboards, and you're making it up there and then on the spot.
Wow.
I mean, it's ballsy, but it's a little bit dangerous. And I think the result was that they should have given him another year to do it, and they probably would have had a much better film.
Yeah, when I think about things like, well, the way they portrayed Radagast, when I think about the place where for me it all went completely south was the Hall of the Goblin King.
Oh yeah, that was horrible.
And the chase afterwards and everything.
And the dropping down, the sliding down the interior cliff where everybody gets crushed.
Yeah, it was all. It was The Hobbit meets Mousetrap, is what it was.
Yes, yeah,
and so
it really was.
And so that's where it completely fell apart. But in light of what he said there, I can see him going into this kind of a scene where Guillermo del Toro, who's known for his sort of weird whimsy, where he creates, he likes oddity more than he likes sort of consistency. He likes the shock and surprise. So I have no doubt that there was this sort of Rube Goldberg style chase that was in the script, and having heard what Jackson said there, that's really interesting, because I could see this being the combination of like, well, let's just throw it together, see what happens. And, there's no thought of realism. There's no thought of pacing. There's no thought of staying true to the story. Nothing. Yeah. It's just sort of, slapped together.
It was slapped together for sure. This was though, I did find a couple of quotes from Guillermo del Toro on characters, or at least his approach to certain characters in The Hobbit. And these are two that stood out to me. This was his thought on Bjorn. This is from 2014 from Crave Online. I don't even know if that's a site anymore. But he said, I think we had a very, very, very different approach to Bjorn. My Bjorn was almost a bipolar character. I wanted him to transform almost involuntarily, like rage transformed him. So like a werewolf or
werebear. Yeah.
Werebear. Yeah. So anyway, not my cup of tea when it comes to Bjorn, and probably not Tolkien's either, because I don't think I don't think the idea was that his rage turns him into a real monster.
You know what's funny is I actually thought about this when I was younger and I had read The Hobbit, and it came from the passage where Bjorn warns the dwarves in The Hobbit not to wander outside of his house, and that implied. I thought to myself, well, if he's fully in control of himself, because obviously he has that sort of the skin changer aspect has a little bit of a lycanthrope feel to it. So I wonder if it's involuntary or voluntary, and whether he's more bestial when he turns. So I was thinking about it, but then I realized there's another explanation, which is that remember how there was when Gandalf followed his tracks, it turns out he attracts a bunch of bears. Bears come to him.
Yeah.
So maybe it was Bjorn was just warning them, that not to wander outside lest a random bear or animal take them down. And so, which I think is more believable because given how much of a master of his domain Bjorn is, he's like the Hobbit's version of Tom Bombadil in a way.
Yeah.
And so he's a little more in conflict with the surrounds than Tom Bombadil is, but anyway.
Yeah,
I left that idea behind because it didn't jive with the rest of Bjorn's character.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't jive with him following them and protecting them as a bear, essentially, as they're getting to Mirkwood either. And so, yeah,
exactly. Well, that's the best point because what in Guillermo del Toro's vision, sorry, tongue tied today. In his vision, what does Bjorn do? Like watch them go and then realize he gave him his ponies and go into a rage and then
that's why
and then somehow not eat them for 3 days while he tracks
Del Toro could have likely made it so that he chases them into Mirkwood and that's why they end up there anyway. Who knows?
Right.
That would have been an interesting thing. Okay, but here's his other quote about orcs. And sadly, this would have jived completely with the Rings of Power. He said this in Empire magazine in 2013. I was approaching the orcs in a different way. I wanted to have them to have their own culture, their own cuisine, their own architecture. So
negative, Batman.
So anyway, we might have still dodged a bullet by not having Guillermo del Toro direct. It might have been even worse. You never know.
Yeah.
But there you go. That's your Hobbit fact this week.
Yeah, well, that would be a fun one-off podcast for you and I to do at one point is compare which is worse, The Hobbit or the Rings of Power in the treatment, because there are aspects of both that are just absolutely awful.
Yeah.
The whole idea of like elves and dwarves falling in love with each other is just, I wanted to smash my head against a wall.
But not everybody did, Nick Groom. Just look at that. We interviewed an author a year and a half ago who really liked the story of Tauriel in The Hobbit. That was his favorite character in Middle Earth. So anyway, but let's get into The Hobbit chapter. What is this? Chapter 8? Yeah, chapter 8, the second half of it. We're going to look at flies and spiders. Michael, as per is our wont, would you give us a brief overview of this half of the chapter?
Sure, and it's not hard because this is mostly one long fight. So this chapter began with immediately after the dwarves and Bilbo step into the enchanted ring of the elves, and Thorin, it turns out, falls asleep, gets knocked, and both Thorin and Bilbo, who had stepped into the ring when it was lit, topple and wake up a little while later. The others are chased, are in pitch darkness, and they run around trying to find each other and succeed in only finding nothing but spiders. So they are captured by spiders. Bilbo wakes up and he discovers, and he can't find the dwarves, and he's so flummoxed and depressed he goes to sleep again, and dreams of bacon and eggs, and he is almost trapped by a spider that weaves webs around him while he's sleeping, but he wakes up and is able to break free, kill the spider, and then he puts on the ring and finds, by luck, Tolkien says, if luck you call it, says Gandalf, then he picks the right direction, wanders, and finds the spider lair, which is a piece of midnight in an already dark forest. and he finds the dwarves being captured. He draws the spiders away with antics, singing songs, calling them names, which apparently is the worst thing you could do to a spider. And Jonathan, I know you have some notes about that, but draws them away and then comes back and frees half the dwarves, or roughly half the dwarves. And then what ensues is a battle between the dwarves, the hobbit, and the spiders. And they battle, and until finally, in the end, they drive off the spiders, and we're told the story of what happened to Thorin when they all realized that Thorin isn't with them anymore. And so we're told about Thorin's experience being taken prisoner by the Wood Elves, the Wood Elf King, and we get a little glimpse of a little backstory, a little Silmarillion backstory, which was cool. And I actually didn't look up whether this was added in the second version or not.
It doesn't seem like it. It was already there.
So we already had the light elves, deep elves, and sea elves. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, they were already all there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that we'll go back to the beginning, but that part, it shows how much Tolkien loves his elves, because he spends 2.5 paragraphs or so, 3 paragraphs, talking about the elves and where they are, and like he has it all already in his head, and he doesn't have to think about where they are and what they are, but he just wants to bring them into the story, and they have more backstory practically than the dwarves do at this point. Even though he does essentially bring up the Nauglamir also in that, or
exactly. The original sin of the original Wood Elf King, Thingol.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, so let's go back to the beginning and talk about how, once again, the despair that Bilbo feels is his foodlessness more than anything else. Where he says,
it's so classic.
He sat himself down with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him. And that's when he realized there was a tree around there, or there was a spider starting to web him up. But I thought, again, it's just so funny. Like, Tolkien knows Bilbo, and he's not going to let us forget that what Bilbo really wants is the comforts of home.
Exactly.
But it's in this situation that his Tookish side really comes out, I think, stronger than at any point anywhere in the book so far.
Right. He is actually becomes proud of himself.
Yes.
Slaying his first spider, and he takes the opportunity to name his elvish dagger Sting.
Yeah. Like any good, like Anglachel and Glamdring.
Yep.
He has that, and I love that. Tolkien wrote about him at this point, like after he fights the spiders. He felt a different person and much fiercer and bolder, in spite of an empty stomach. So the worst thing that could damage his boldness was his empty stomach.
Can't dodge the reference to the empty stomach.
I love it. I just notice it so much every time now, reading through it. This time is such deliberateness that he just. Bilbo and food are like, are like, I don't know. I was going to say flies and poo, but that's like a good analogy.
Probably not a good analogy.
No. Are like black on kettle or something. I don't know, right? You can't get away from it.
Right.
But it was his, like. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how big do you think these spiders are? I've thought about this I wonder about this for a long time. How large? We're not talking Shelob size, obviously.
We're not talking Shelob size. Well, they're big enough that they can be killed by a rock thrown. So they're not huge. I would say
small enough they could be killed by a rock throw.
Yeah. They're small enough. Yeah, correct. They're like.
Are they like large dog size?
I would like, I'm thinking of them like in comparison to Bilbo. I think they're like 2/3 Bilbo sized, 2/3 to 3/4 Bilbo sized.
Okay, that's not even large dog, because hobbits are about 3 feet high, so 2/3 would be about 2 feet high.
Well, I guess how it's 2 feet high can be pretty high if it's got a spider with legs. I mean, that's still pretty large all around. So.
Oh yeah. No, obviously these are spiders. He does at one point say that there were spiders huge and horrible sitting on the branch above him, but what's huge to a hobbit is not necessarily Huge.
I mean, I would say like an 8-inch spider is huge to me too.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The word huge we can equivocate. We can use it in reference to the normal
Mhm.
size of normal spiders, or we could use it in reference to the person themselves. So who knows what that is? I've wondered about that. I
What
mean, yeah, I
how much
just
do you
can't
think?
imagine. I don't imagine them much larger than like a Great Dane. That's about as big
Mhm.
as I think they're going to get. Um,
Well, they get, I mean, so
maybe a
Shelob's
little.
pretty large. Ungoliant's huge.
Sure.
And so these, obviously, not that these here were direct descendants at the time he wrote it of either of those.
Right.
But spiders were, I mean, spiders were a thing. So here's the thing about spiders. Like, he was asked in a 1957 interview um, about like what is it about spiders, and he said this. He said, "I put in the spiders largely because this was, you remember, primarily written for my children. At least I had them in mind. And one of my sons, in particular, dislikes spiders with a great intensity. I did it to thoroughly frighten him, and it did." And throughout his life, Tolkien's son Michael had what he called a deep-rooted abhorrence of spiders. So, isn't Michael his oldest son too?
Yes. Or no, John.
John,
Is
maybe.
John
In any
older?
case, he screwed with his son. He's like, we're gonna really make you like look under the bed this time when you go to bed. But spiders. I mean, clearly he had a thing for spiders. He said at one point, I think too, that he was bitten by a tarantula when he was young in South Africa.
Okay.
Although I believe that has been debunked because there aren't any tarantulas where he lived in
Right.
South Africa. So
Sure,
unless it was a pet
but
or
it was a
something.
large spider of some kind.
But
Obviously.
it made a mark on him. And so you have these characters that slay spiders in his books. I mean, there's obviously Sam, who does it with completely slayer, but he fights her and takes it to Shelob. You have Bilbo here, who fights spiders. Beren fights spiders in the Lay of Lathian.
That's right.
And I'm not sure if you caught this. In the Silmarillion that we read, Ungoliant is said to devour herself, and that's how she
Yes.
dies. She eventually dies. However, in Tolkien's original story of Eärendil, that's not what happened. He actually, this is in the Histories of Middle Earth. Did I write it down? Which book it is? Dang it, I don't think I did. But here's what he wrote. This is in Histories of Middle Earth, the fourth one. Which one is that?
Don't remember off the top of my head.
Sauron. No, that's 9. They're not in order on my bookshelf. It's a problem. Okay, so so here's what he wrote. He wrote about Eärendil and what happened. Ungoliant's only other major appearance in the mythos was to have occurred in the Tale of Eärendil, but as Christopher Tolkien observed, the great tale was never written. That was in the Book of Lost Tales where he mentioned that. And the story is known to us only through extensive outlines and synopses in several Silmarillion texts. Thus, an early outline simply lists an encounter with Ungoliante or something along those lines as one of the major incidents on Eärendil's great voyage into the firmament, but gives no details. The 1926 sketch of the mythology is succinct but specific, following Eärendil's decision to seeking Valinor. And Tolkien wrote this here in a note. Here follows the marvelous adventures of Ungoliant, Eärendil's ship in the sea and isles, and of how Eärendil slew Ungoliant in the south. And then in 1930, in his notes to the Quenta Silmarillion, he also wrote a small brief account that says this: "In the Lay of Eärendil is many a thing sung of his adventures in the deep and in lands untrodden and in many seas and many isles. Ungoliant in the south he slew, and her darkness was destroyed, and light came to many regions which had yet long been hid." So I like that better than Ungoliant devoured herself. That might be kind of fun, but I feel like, man, give Eärendil like what a great part of his story. You've got Turin slaying Glaurung, you've got Beren slaying Carcharoth and getting past Morgoth, but Eärendil, like Ungoliant, like that's like the second biggest baddie in all of Middle Earth.
Exactly.
Of all time.
Pretty impressive. I mean, maybe it was that disproportion that led him to change it, because remember, even Morgoth has to call his Balrogs to defend him against Ungoliant. And you could say, well, yeah, because she's just eaten all these items of power, and so she's swollen, she's grown to such a great size that Morgoth can't deal with her alone. Which is fair. And maybe you could, if we were to combine the two stories, she would have been much diminished and famished when facing Arendelle. So maybe that's the maybe that's the headcanon explanation. But yeah, I like that story better. I agree with you. I like Arendelle fighting Ungoliant. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's like his greatest heroes always have to fight spiders. Well, I like that. I like that. Even if it's not how it ended up in Christopher Tolkien's. Maybe Christopher Tolkien just decided to leave that out. He could have changed that in the Silmarillion. He was making some editorial decisions.
Yeah, that's true.
Who knows?
He had choices.
Who knows? All right. So Bilbo, he disappears. He uses the ring to disappear. And also, by the way, like you talked about, if chance you call it, right? He stumbles on this in the right way. In the original version of The Hobbit, in the first draft, he follows a rope, a string of spider web that he coils up and follows it to where the spiders are. So he's actually rolling it, and then he uses that as a way to get back to where he was too, like as a breadcrumbs thing. So anyway, so it wasn't just chance, but Tolkien changed it. He changed it. He decided, no, that doesn't. Too much prose time spent on trying to tell them how he wound up a spider string and had to go back. But yeah, that's in the history of The Hobbit. You can actually see that there, and it does feel a little bit unwieldy the way that he writes that out. So, but it goes with Tolkien's idea that if luck you call it, providence is an important part of a story.
Yep.
Okay, so then we find out he's also he not only has the trick of being able to disappear, he's actually pretty good at throwing things, particularly rocks. One of his skills that Tolkien decided that all of a sudden that he used to have, because he used to practice throwing stones at things until rabbits and squirrels and even birds got out of his way as quick as lightning if they saw him stoop. And even grown up, he had to spend a deal of time at Quoits, quoits, I'm not sure what that is, dart throwing, shooting at the wand, bowls, nine pins, and other quiet games of the aiming and throwing sort. Indeed, he could do lots of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking that I haven't had time to tell you about.
This feels like straight from him telling his kids the story. Like it's just like he's like talking about. He brings up all these games that there's no evidence that hobbits have the technology to make nine pins, for example.
That's right. Bowling pins didn't exactly exist.
But he's just pulling out names of games that his kids will understand that have to do with throwing. And then he even finishes it off with but I don't have time to tell you about that right now. What do you mean? You're writing a book. If you take whatever time you want. There's no time.
Yeah. Well, it's a way for him to get out of a situation because Bomber is about to get killed. So he throws a stone at the spider. It's hit him plunk on the head and it dropped senseless off the tree, flopped to the ground with all its legs curled up. So, but this is really like, let's talk about, we don't have to get into all the details of how he found it, but what I want to say is like, I feel like this is the narrative point where Bilbo changes, right? He succeeds on his own without even like he at one point, right, he forgets to put the ring on and he's still able to do what's necessary to free the dwarves and to get them to safety.
Right.
And he does it until he nearly collapses and he thinks he can't go on anymore. And then finally the spiders relent and go away. But I don't know. I feel like this is the point at which Bilbo becomes a took. He gets comfort from his ability to be the primary mover and shaker in the story. He's the guy who's going to get him out of the situations, right? They respect him. Although what's really funny then, when you think about it, the dwarves only respect him because of the ring. Or they respected him more because he found the ring, which was an interesting thing. I don't know. That's kind of a quick microcosm of that. What do you think about the whole idea that this is where he changes most?
I agree. I think the naming of his sword, you're right. Tolkien doesn't use the word tookish, but by slaying the spider by himself with no help from anybody else, and then he feels proud of himself, and he's feeling that tookish side come up, that love for adventure, and then he does a thing which is necessary maybe in epic heroic literature, which is if you have a weapon and you've done great things with it, then you name the weapon, and so he does. So he's following the old heroic trope in that regard. And so I think he's embraced his Tookishness. Maybe he's not quite a hero yet, but he is on his way. He's at least courageous, and has shown himself to be someone that can actually save his friends. I've always thought just more fuel on the fire of what low character dwarves have in The Hobbit. And I was just reading last night to my kids, by the way, by contrast, the end of Return of the King, when Gimli and Legolas are talking, when Éomer comes back after to gather the body of his father from Minas Tirith to take it back to Rohan, and we see this interaction where he, of course, at that point, Galadriel and Celeborn are in Minas Tirith, and Éomer calls Gimli and says, "You had harsh words before about your axe. Which I'm going to let you go get your axe if you need to, but now having met essentially the Queen of the Woods, met Galadriel, he says, Éomer says, if you need to go get your axe, you'll need to do so now, because although I was wrong, I'm paraphrasing, although I was wrong about Galadriel, there's still one fairer, and that's Arwen Evenstar. And if you need to, if that's still a problem for you, because Gimli had threatened him with his axe for speaking badly of Galadriel early in the Two Towers, then I'll call for my sword and we'll settle it. And Gimli, it's a conversation which could have been had by two knights of the Round Table in the Le Morte d'Arthur and the chivalric tales. Gimli is a knight in the Lord of the Rings. The dwarves are mean and petty. The fact that they look down on Bilbo until until he can do things which none of them can do, like they couldn't do, any one of them couldn't do these things themselves.
Yeah.
Yet they expect him to, and then when he does, they grudgingly give him respect. I think that this is a transition. It is part of one of the tropes of heroism, is that you are not always understood or appreciated by those that you do good things for. Yeah. And there are different genres that lean into this. So the Witcher genre leans into it very heavily. But the idea that the hero is an outcast is or at least has to always work to prove his worth.
Isn't there something like like if no man is a hero in his own country type of thing? I think that's
right.
A phrase for somebody. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Or in his own community even, and that's community right there. They wouldn't want to acknowledge that. Let's talk a little bit about the poetry too, or the songs that he sings, the things that really drive them mad, more so than the rocks that are hitting them on the head. It's being called Attercop and Tomnoddy. And so there's a bunch of notes you can get between the history of the Hobbit and just researching on the internet, and also the annotated Hobbit about this. And so we can talk a little bit about that. What is the deal with it? What's interesting about in the history of the Hobbit, you find out, is that his first poem, it came out, Tolkien wrote that. There are no other notes about that. He pretty much wrote it extant without any previous notes. The second one changed a lot, but the first one, he just had that. He knew exactly what he wanted to say.
The lazy lob and crazy cob.
Is that the first one would be the Attercop, old fat spider spinning in a tree, old fat spider can't see me, Attercop, won't you stop?
Right.
Stop spinning. Okay. That's the first one. But that I always wondered, like, okay, Attercop, where does what does that come from, and why Tomnoddy, right? Old Tomnoddy, all big body, old Tomnoddy can't spy me, Attercop, down you drop, you'll never catch me up your tree. So Attercop is simply the Old English word for spider. Which was first recorded somewhere around 1000 AD. A modernized spelling would be Adder-Cob, Adder-Cob, which just means poison spider. And you can think of the word cobweb. That's where that comes from. Spider web, same sort of thing. And so that's all it means. It's not even like a derogatory term, but they sure don't like it. Tomnoddy, however, is simply something that means like a fool, a simpleton, somebody who, like tomfoolery, right? Naughty means fool, essentially. So Tomnoddy is 19th century word that is a word for fool, essentially. So tomfoolery, Tomnoddy, that's where that comes from. So nothing spectacular there. But Attercop, I had no idea that that was actually an Old English word. That was the original word for spider. And then eventually we got up the word spider. I want to say it was like the 13th or 14th century, maybe 15th when I looked that up. And that comes from the word spinner, and it was somehow morphed into spider from spinner.
Yeah, and there's a little oddity to all this. And I think it has to do with the civilization of the spiders, the tribe. I'm calling it that for lack of a better term. I don't know what to call it. What I mean is,
are you going to appropriate the spider culture that Tolkien gave us now and somehow
far be it from me to appropriate culture, but and especially not spider culture. But Tolkien says, quite apart from the stones, no spider has ever liked being called Attercop. Tomnoddy is, of course, insulting to anybody. What? No spider likes being called Attercop? What is that even?
What?
It's the word for spider. So like
Yeah, right.
like it's like saying no human likes being called human. Okay. And what's interesting about that is I tie it to the conversation the spiders have with each other, which Bilbo overhears before they go to kill Bomber, because Bomber kicks one of them in the face and off the branch, in the head and off the branch when they go to pinch him to see if he's how ready he is to be eaten. So what's odd is they insult each other, or they seem to have a sense of pride. And because the one that gets knocked off the branch is the one that had the idea that he was going to prove they were still alive, they weren't dead,
Right?
And so they have this banter back and forth where basically it's like watching sort of like street thugs mock each other about simple things and then laugh at the misfortune of the one that gets taken advantage of, and so they have a kind of culture. But I guess there must be some history with this word Attercop where it was used. But I just don't like. I don't think it's anything Tolkien probably put any thought into. I just think it's a again, it reminds me again of this kind of statement that he might make to his kids. Of course, no spider likes being called Attercop. It's like no explanation for that one. Even though that's what they are.
The only thing that I did find is that in the second poem where he calls him lazy lob and crazy cob, there was this note that cob, like we mentioned before, Attercop, cob is a spider essentially, and so it's this note I think was in the annotated Hobbit. Lob is a neat piece of Tolkienian linguistic doubling, since the word means both spider and also a rustic or country bumpkin. Hence, it is both accurate and insulting at the same time. So that was an insulting word to them, like country bumpkin spiders.
He likes that OB thing as an insult because I think Bob and Knob, who are mocked by Barlam and Butterbur for being slow and not very good at their jobs, apparently. So anyway, it's that's a sound Tolkien liked to use for insult purposes, for whatever reason.
Yeah. But it's the most I've dove into his poetry, and now I finally know the ins and outs of Attercop.
Yeah. Now I have a different question. It's weird about the mechanics of how the invisibility ring works, how the One Ring works.
Okay.
It says when he drew the sword to cut himself free from the cobwebs when they almost trapped him, it says the spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was, and at once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the hobbit along the ground and the branches, etc. How? What? Like the sword isn't. Gollum doesn't see the sword when he's invisible in the cave. He puts it away because the sword gives off light, but the sword isn't visible. It's not like a floating sword sitting there, but now it is. So I think this is actually a place where Tolkien just didn't think through the physics of how the ring worked, because at one point the things that you're holding are invisible with you.
Yeah.
And another point they're not. So I don't know.
Right. It's the good old Star Trek question is like, hey, how come if you're not on our plane of existence, why aren't you falling through the floor, but you can run through walls? That that happens in all these shows, right? It's like,
Yeah.
or it's was it an X-Men movie too? But yeah, same sort of thing. So they're like, we're just gonna go with it. I think it's more like Tolkien was telling the story, and that's where it was. And it's not even that important. Like it's not a plot point that they can see his sword that it really matters a whole lot. It's just making them angrier.
Right.
That they can see it and they don't know what it is.
I mean,
So
they would know what a sword is. They just don't know what a floating, glowing sword is.
well, yeah,
So
that would be a problem.
yeah, interesting. So there we go.
Yeah,
It also
thanks for
implies,
nitpicking, man. Jeez.
sure. Yeah, no worries. Do what you're good at in life, and that's what I do.
So you were gonna say.
I was going to say there's an implication here that because the spiders, it says they don't fight. They don't find themselves in fights much with people with weapons, and so that's how the weakened dwarves and one fierce hobbit are able to fend off a whole colony of spiders for a long time. That kind of implies that the spiders stay away from the elves, because they're, I can't imagine especially with the fairy nature that Tolkien's giving the wood elves here, that they would be easily caught. You would have situations where they would fight. So
Well,
it's odd because the spiders are on them almost instantly once the elves disappear. So anyway.
Well, I'm sure the elves, being as secretive and as private as they were, they didn't mind having, like I mentioned before, it's sort of like the Enchanted River was the moat around their.
Right. Yeah, they let the spiders be there.
Spiders are just the alligators in the moat. They're the ones that don't let people in. They might just not be the best at protecting, as we find out, because they're beaten off by the dwarves who are drunk on the poison still, essentially, and can barely stand.
Armed with rocks and sticks.
Yeah. But it's really Bilbo. He said, let's see. He writes, his little sword was something new in the way of stings for them. How it darted to and fro. It shone with delight. I like that one. He anthropomorphizes the sword a little bit, right? It shone with delight. It's delight, like cool. The sword itself likes it. So even the classical way of him approaching swords is having an actual character is even right here in this little bit.
Right.
Half a dozen were killed before the rest drew off and left Bomber to Bilbo. That, like, half a dozen were killed. That's Bilbo killing essentially half a dozen of them on his own, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So like he's doing the hard work, and so these spiders aren't exactly scary. Although in any situation we are with insects, one insect is not scary. However, if you get 25 coming after you while you're trying to kill just one, that does get scarier. So the volume of spiders would be the scary thing here. And so they had to essentially keep beating them off and escaping at the same time until it looked hopeless. But they just happened to get away. And then finally, even this time through, I didn't catch that he said 12 dwarves. And because it is 12 dwarves. The first time you read this, you don't realize, Thorin's not there.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah,
when I was reading through it, I was reading through quickly. I was just kind of, because I do read it for enjoyment the first time, and then I went through it, and I didn't notice that he said 12 dwarves, and so he tells you right away there aren't enough dwarves, and he counts them down, and there were 5 more hanging or 4 more hanging after cutting down 8 and that sort of thing. But so Thorin's not there, but nobody notices for a while. These are not your best friends either. If they don't notice the leader isn't there
until they're about to go to sleep. They've wandered the way back to the circle of where the elves had been, and they're about to go to sleep. And then Balin or Dwalin, which one of the two, pops at Dwalin, opens an eye and says, "Where's Thorin?" Like he's their king, and they don't even realize these dwarves. They're
petty, like you said.
They're very, very petty. And so then we hear about what actually happened to Thorin, which is that, like Bilbo, he fell unconscious on stepping into the fairy ring, or the ring. And unlike Bilbo, he slept a lot longer. So Bilbo woke up a little while later, but Thorin, it said, slept through the night and then most of the next day until the elves came back and found him and bound him and took him prisoner. And then we get an account of the elves how they're wood elves. It says, the feasting people were wood elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the West, and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to fairy, which was the one instance of the word fairy appearing
Yeah, I saw that too.
in The Hobbit. And there, it, of course, refers to Valinor or Eldamar. So it's an actual place, very similarly to how the medievals thought of fairy. Fairy was an actual place in the West. There, the light elves and deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages and grew fairer and wiser and more learned and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things before some came back into the wide world. Shout out to the Vanyar. I love it.
Yeah,
we never get the Vanyar, but the White Elves mentioned, but
and the Teleri, you got to give them their.
Yeah, Sea Elves, but the Sea Elves get mentioned a couple other times, but no one ever talks about the Vanyar. They're like the most boring because they're the best.
They're always there. They're just
the wisest.
They do the right things all the time.
They do the right thing all the time, and so no one ever talks about them.
They just stay in Valinor. They know it's good for them, and stick around.
Exactly.
But I like that even in the next section he talks about in the wide world of the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, and even then he's thinking about the Silmaril. He's thinking about the creation of Middle Earth, and he's thinking about the trees are there, and he's thinking the sun and the moon, and the Arundel was in there. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt or to ride. What's interesting is that he hasn't gotten away. Like, elves are dangerous here still, right? Still elves they were and remain, even after they said, like, I'm trying to find a quote here that I had for this, and it's not.
They were more dangerous and less wise. They differ from the
There
high
you
elves.
go. Yeah. But they're still good people with a capital G and a capital P. He says.
Yeah, he uses a lot of capitals in this paragraph. There's a capital for fairy. There's a capital for light elves, deep elves, and sea elves. There's a capital for two capitals for wide world. Yeah. Sun and moon get capitals.
Men
men get capitals, and then good people get capitals. So he's it's interesting that when he's referencing the Silmarillion most, or the work that would become the Silmarillion, I should say.
That is really interesting. I didn't realize, like, in the wide world, two capital W's, the wood elves, capital W, lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, capital S, capital N. I wonder what the choices of that were. Like, why wide world in particular? Meaning that maybe it's the proper noun for the entire world, for Arda, for everything.
Right. So the only thing, I don't know, it's a great question. I wondered it myself. The only guess that I have is that he's here referring to actual concepts and things that he's written stories about, and so they are proper names in that regard. And as we know from the Silmarillion material, for example, the sun and the moon were capitalized when they were talked about in regard to their creation and everything. And of course, Arda is capitalized. Middle Earth is the first M is capitalized, and so all I can think is that he's putting the stuff of his larger world in here, except in a couple places, instead of using their proper names that he had invented for them, he uses simple and common names that people would use, but he still capitalizes them so instead of Arda or Middle Earth, there's the wide world. Instead of Vanyar, there's light elves. Instead of Noldor, there's deep elves. Instead of Teleri, there's sea elves, all capitalized. Sun and the moon are capitalized. Wood elves instead of Sylvan is capitalized. So I that's my only guess is that he's thinking of his names, but then he's putting it in Hobbit speak for a simpler book for children.
Capitals in there,
but he retains the capitals.
And by just capitalizing it lends the words more weight, more import. So even though you might not notice it, you realize that, like when he says they are good people, that's an interesting one because it doesn't necessarily refer to something in his legendarium.
The free peoples?
Well, he says, still elves they were and remain, and that is good people.
Yeah, doesn't he capitalize free peoples?
Free peoples in Earth? I don't know.
Middle Earth at a couple times, I think. I could be wrong. a search will no doubt turn up whether I am or not. But I thought
Yeah.
he referred to maybe, but maybe he didn't capitalize free peoples. But yeah, I agree. The good people, the good people has a different connotation too in legend. So he's sort of halfway tapping into that. So the good people is the name for that the Celtic cultures give to fairies.
Oh, okay.
They're called the
Okay.
good people. They're mischievous.
That's good to know.
They're dangerous. They're very fey, and they're called the good people. So, but I know he doesn't mean that exactly here. He's referring to all of the. He's referring to the men, the elves, the dwarves, the hobbits. These are all good people.
I just looked it up in Lord of the Rings real fast. Looked up free peoples. Free peoples, when said by Legolas, is capitalized. However, when it's said by Treebeard, when he names the first name of the four, the free peoples, eldest of all the elf children, he does not capitalize it. And then let's see, the last one, that's just Theoden, I think. Yeah, he just used the word free people. So, but when Legolas uses it, it is capitalized. So there is something to that. There's something to that.
Okay, well, I'm half right. It was pretty funny. Speaking of Treebeard, like we read the part where Treebeard admits to Gandalf that he let Saruman go from Orthanc when they come there with everyone. And I, like, my son who was here, my 10-year-old son who's hearing it for the first time, he goes, "No."
That's great.
He doesn't even know what's going to happen, and he's dismayed, like, "Oh, Treebeard."
How dumb can you be? But it's right in character with him.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then we learn about the wood elves. Like we mentioned earlier, they even brings up the story of the Nauglamir, or at the time was actually called the Nauglafring in his stuff. He hadn't changed the name of it.
Nice,
yet.
interesting.
Curious about that. About one of the great, probably the greatest battle between elves and dwarves, where they killed Thingol and Doriath because he had them put the Silmarils in a necklace, and then they decided to take it and kill Thingol and go back. And then Beren leads his band to destroy the elves and reclaim the Silmaril there from
the dwarves. You mean
the dwarves? Sorry, the dwarves. Yeah. Anyway, so there you go. So you even get that. Even that story was in there. It's funny because I felt like in reading this here, I could feel Tolkien wanting to tell more, but holding back a little bit.
Exactly.
Right. In the Lord of the Rings, he doesn't hold back because it's a different audience. But in this one, I feel like he's still held back in the telling of it to his children, or still kind of being in that realm. Although I think, like going back to when we were looking at his attempted rewrite that was a little bit more mature, this would have been pretty cool to have this story of theirs and be told, and have these characters be more tied to that mythology than they are kind of too briefly here. So then Thorin is grilled by the king, and he's asked, "Why did you attack them?" And he's like, "We didn't attack you. We were hungry. Dang it. We came to beg because we were starving." And he's like, "Yeah, no. Why did you attack us?" Like, he doesn't. Ultimately, it comes across as like, "Oh, you were hungry. Okay, and where are they now? And what are they doing, huh? Oh, because if you were hungry, you would have stayed there just like you. But no."
Yeah, they don't come out. They don't come across very, very reasonable or intelligent.
No.
The elves,
even though they're good people,
right? How good are they?
Yeah,
Not
right.
that good.
Right. But the thing that shuts Thorin up is when he's asked, what brought you into the forest at all? And he wouldn't say anything else. And then King said, "Take him away, keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he waits 100 years."
That's true. He doesn't have him tortured or anything.
No, he just waits there. We'll get into it next week about what happened in the original draft, because it is a little bit different in how the elves or the dwarves are treated and in how they escape in the original draft. But yeah, so Thorin is there now in prison. The dwarves and Bilbo are wondering where Thorin is, and we are left to discover that in chapter 9. Any final words? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, not now. Yeah, we'll talk more about the elves next week.
Yeah,
and so it's very, Tolkien's put in a lot more A lot more effort into this culture than the spider culture, that's for sure.
One thing that actually I failed to mention, in just as a quick aside, it doesn't really have a place necessarily in our whole discussion, but it just struck me, is that this is how Tolkien wrote what happened to the spider when it died in this part of the chapter. He wrote, "Then it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks." And I thought, huh, kind of like how Shelob did it in Peter Jackson's films. I feel like the whole it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs and it was like dancing up and down. I thought, oh, I wonder if this inspired them directly to be like, hey, let's try and make it look like that, like he described it in The Hobbit. So just sort of struck me as a similarity that is probably made, like, has a reason for it. So it's not just a coincidence. Anyway.
I like that. No, that's good. It's funny how, to me, my final thought is, it's so interesting how essentially this part of the Hobbit, from the goblins onward, feels like up to a certain point. He stops doing it at the mid of Laketown, but it feels like Tolkien just explaining the various, like, the story is an excuse for him to tell us more about the peoples of his world. So we get to know what Goblin Society is like briefly. We get to know the Eagles Society briefly. We get to know Bjorn and his society briefly. We get to know the Spider Society. We get to know the Elves Society. We get to know the Men of Dale, the Lake Town, formerly Dale. And all along we're taught a little bit more about Dwarven Society, and Hobbit Society is all about the food and the nine pins apparently. But Tolkien clearly had a world, and he was telling a story that just sort of carried his main character through the world as a way to encounter all of these various peoples and creatures. It's fascinating.
Yeah, but it's interesting because he came up with those societies, those things. The men,
wargs. I forgot wargs too.
Wargs too. Yeah, the men, the elves, the spiders, even I guess the wargs too. All of these
interact with each other.
But I mean, all these came out of the Silmarillion, right? All these came out of what it is. But the society, the culture that he likes the most, came out of this children's book, The Hobbit, right? I'm a Hobbit in everything. I'm in Hobbit. What is his phrase? I am a Hobbit in all things except for size, right? That's who I am. And so, but he didn't discover that essentially until he wrote
No Hobbits in the Silmarillion. Exactly.
Yeah, no. But his life's work, which was creating the Silmarillion, creating the history, the entire cosmology of Middle Earth, didn't have these hobbits. I find it interesting that he didn't discover that until he was a father telling stories to his children. That I am. This is the culture that I enjoy the most. That discovered while telling my children.
It is interesting because it's so unlike everything else, right?
Yeah,
he spends so much time on the culture of the elves and the Silmarillion.
Yeah,
and telling you about the Valar and the
and all those other things were already there. Even the spiders. Like I think I read that Tower Nufuin, which is where I think Beren encountered the spiders. He eventually called Mirkwood as well in the notes to the Silmarillion. So there's a similarity there, and so that probably inspired him to put this into the Hobbit. So it was already all there, and he was leaning on it. And it was that, I don't remember that quote by C.S. Lewis where he said, hobbits are more interesting when you put them in situations that aren't Hobbit-like.
Right, exactly.
Right, this is where, and so he keeps doing that in the Hobbit here, and that's what he found he needed to do in the Lord of the Rings again. But that's maybe that's why he likes the Hobbit, because he finds their strength in these crazy situations in the world that he created to them, and he puts himself in those places. And what would he do? And what would he feel like? And does he want his bacon and eggs and toast when he's in those situations? If he were
right, he makes them both silly and courageous. They're the hope of the world because they're the only ones that can handle the ring for any length of time. But they're also the most helpless.
Yeah.
Of all the good folk. The good people, as he says here.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's shut it down right before we hit that 1 hour mark, because that's the hard cutoff time. We're going to get into our extended podcast. We'll take a look at, or we'll talk about the recreation of Tolkien's voice and what that sounded like to Michael, what that sounded like to me. There were a couple issues with it that I'm sure you guys heard when you listened to it, but it's pretty impressive what we can do now when we want to recreate something that we might have heard had that person still been alive. So get into that. Go to theonewing.com/member to become a member so you can hear that. You can listen to it on YouTube or just through your podcast player. Either or is great. And we will see you on the other side, everybody.
Goodbye, freeloaders.